Thank you all again. Anybody have any questions? Come up, line up here. For the panel? Nobody? Jocelyn, look like you have a question.
I do need a second though, so
I have a question though. For Helen and Charles, how did you get your staff, your traditionally non-diverse staff, to get on board or become enthusiastic if they weren't about diversity initiatives? I think that could be difficult for some. So what did you do?
I can start.
Please do, yeah.
Well, one thing is I wish we had done was to do the white supremacy training.
Would you have called it that?
Yeah, that's what we're calling it. And I'm sorry. I wish we had done the white supremacy training in the beginning, because I think what has happened in the piece we've already done, and I'm sure will happen even more in the day we're doing on Monday, is to make it clear what is wrong with this culture and that we must change it. We have to change it. The other thing is that a lot of people were just ready to sign on and ready to do it and very enthusiastic, and some were not, and kind of had to be dragged in and just told, this will be to the great benefit of the press as well as to your department, and you need to do it. And I remember one instance where a manager just did not feel she had two qualified candidates. She wanted to hire the white candidate, and we felt strongly she should hire the person of color, who was also very well qualified and very smart. And we just had to really say that you're not weighing racial diversity strongly enough. You're not weighing the benefit that this candidate is bringing, in addition to other qualifications, strongly enough, because this will be really helpful to us as we shape and promote our list. So sometimes it takes a little bit of push, but I think eventually everyone will get there.
For Oxford, y'all can hear me, primarily it's been an evolutionary process. So while many have come forward and raised their hands and want to jump in and help us, some have been a bit resilient for sure and decided they're not going to support us. And with a top-down message from the very top, we're beginning to get more and more support from more and more areas that we didn't think we'd get support. So we're starting to see a bit more enthusiasm, a bit more support, for lack of a better term. And it's fun to have these discussions with these managers, and they seem now very open to it and very supportive of it. And I think we're moving that needle forward. It's something that we do talk about quite often at the senior level of HR, and certainly at NICO's boards meetings. We have discussions with them as well. And it's their responsibility to socialize it down through their teams. Mm-hmm. And we are, again, tracking it to make sure it does happen.
Hi, my name is Bonnie. I have, I think, a couple of comments and a question for the panel. So the first comment is when Helen started speaking about increasing diversity in terms of people of color, the first thought that went through my mind was, I'm Native American. And I'm not obviously Native American, but I am quite proudly. And I'm not sure that people of color would necessarily include me. And so I was happy when you expanded it to diversity in terms of everything, including class. Which brings me to my question and my concern about the Mellon University Fellowship. I was in education for years prior to coming into publishing. And what I witnessed and experienced as an individual and also as an educator was that our educational system is not set up to really support children from poverty or children from lower classes. You said that you were the first person in your family to graduate from college, and I was thinking about the Mellon University Fellowship requiring academic excellence. And I know that for many of my students, they didn't have the resources, the support, the access to Columbia or other organizations or universities like that to be able to boast about their academic excellence. So I just think that we really need to look at diversity in terms of classism, because in my experience, that has been, and I come from a very, very ethnically undiverse state, Vermont. My experience has been that the biggest form of, ism or discrimination is classism. I could tell you every single student would know exactly who lived in that neighborhood as opposed to that neighborhood. So I wondered what the panel's thoughts were or are about how to address at a fundamental level the discrepancies and huge disparities between access for children who come from wealthy families and children who do not.
Thank you for that question. I totally agree with everything that you say. If we can think of institutions in this country that are unequal, public education is probably the most unequal of all of them. And that's because of the way that public education is funded in this country, or not funded. But the Mellon Diversity Fellowships are just one intervention into this larger landscape of diversity initiatives, and it's one that really is positioned to take advantage of the high academic attainment of people who have made it through the system and yet do not have academic jobs waiting for them at the end of this long process. I think this has been discussed by other presenters at this meeting, that there are a lot of unemployed PhDs out there, and so this particular fellowship might provide opportunities for some of those people from diverse backgrounds, but it doesn't get at the larger issue that you raise, which is a very important issue, and I think that Helen and maybe Charles can talk about their efforts to recruit at the high school level, for instance, and at the college level, because certainly we hire entry-level people all the time in publishing who are just out of four-year colleges, and that should include candidates from diverse backgrounds, candidates with disabilities, candidates who, haven't had the opportunities that all of their peers have had.
Although colleges are
by
not
itself.
diverse.
Right.
I mean, increasingly they're becoming less accessible to students from lower
Yeah.
incomes.
And you'll remember that in Chris Jackson's speech, he's talking about a time when he had just come out of high school. He had no college education. So he began his publishing career, and one of my best friends in publishing, very respected person, also had a high school education when she entered publishing. So I think we have to be open to that. Of course, the Mellon grant is for something very specific, but in general, this is one of the requirements, job requirements, that I think we need to think hard about. Are we only talking to people who have a four-year college education? And I think, for most of us, that seems an impossible barrier, but it shouldn't be. And we really probably do need to rethink that because of the barriers to getting a college education these days. And I should also say that if a candidate comes to us and says, I identify as a Native American, and I have a strong connection to Native culture, I, care about it, I grew up in it, that's who I am, that's fine with me. Then you are a person of color because you're identifying with Native Americans who have traditionally been part of that community. We have a very wonderful author who's a black activist named Andrea Ritchie, and she actually looks a lot like you. But so it's not all about the way that you look. It is really about what you bring. The experiences you've had, the knowledge you've gained, the cultural competencies that you have from having been part of a traditionally marginalized group, historically marginalized group.
Thank you. Yeah. I agree with both Gita and Helene on this. With Oxford, we are going to urban parts of the country to talk to high school students, absolutely. And when I think about STEM particularly, and I think about the monies that draws and the K through 12 education that they provide these young students and move them toward the STEM environment, I think publishing has an opportunity to do the same thing. Where we'll get that funding from, I'm not sure, but it's something that I'm certainly looking at for sure for Oxford. And, 2-year associate degrees is something I'm looking at as well for some of our students, because we do have a very distinct internal mobility process that allows the students to finish their 4-year degree with support from Oxford. And as a nonprofit, we could even get them funding from the federal government as well to finish that degree. And then through internal mobility, they can move into other parts of the organization. They won't stay in marketing or stay in acquisitions editing or stay in customer service. They can certainly move around the company or potentially even move around the globe a bit. So we do have ways of defending a bit of that as well.
My name's Maggie. I'm at Northwestern University Press. I really appreciate the point that getting rid of the requirement to have prior publishing experience is really important, and I agree with that a lot. But I found that a lot of my coworkers struggle to get over that barrier when they're looking at applications. So I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions for like getting staff buy-in to sort of be able to look at applications and say we don't require previous publishing experience.
Thoughts?
Send them Chris Jackson's speech. I think examples of people who had no prior publishing experience who have done great things in book publishing could be really helpful. And he's obviously one that you can pull out of the hat, but there are others. And there are others who didn't come in with a college education either. So, but certainly, I started my first job in publishing with no prior publishing experience. I think many of us did in the days where you didn't necessarily have so many internships and there were not nearly as many publishing courses, if any. So I think there are a lot of examples of that you could hold up, including creating your own examples with your own hires.
I completely agree with you. I think there are some managers that are steadfast. They want 2 or 3 internships. They want literally 12 months of experience leaving undergrad. So those are difficult to overcome. There are other managers that are much more open and receptive to undergrads without publishing experience. So we do track those hires as well and show the success as they're working their way through the organization. And we do talk about that as well to some of those managers that are not so receptive. Thoughts?
I think also maybe through the Mellon process, I was on the committee for the second year for the fellowship, and I think a test case would be great, just to ask your colleague. I'm sorry, where are you?
In the back.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I think a test case would be great. Just ask your colleagues, like, let's this one time, like, not list that and see what happens, right? As like an example, we had I think our top 20 all had PhDs. It was like just ridiculous, but no experience in publishing, or that they had worked as an editor for journals at some point in their career, or also expanding the definition of access or experience in publishing, right? Do you know what the peer review process is? Do you know what this process is? Can you define that rather than, but not necessarily maybe having done it yourself?
As a practical matter, any new hire is stepping into an organization where everybody knows publishing already, and that's not the skill set that's actually required. We want our new hires to be bringing us something we don't already know, and they can learn everything else on the job.
Helen, you mentioned that you have 30% people of color in your organization and you're trying for 40. And Charles, you mentioned metrics as well. So I just wanted to ask about the process of setting metrics, whether it's coming from the top of the organization, and is it a strategic initiative, sort of how are these goals being set? And if MIT has those goals too, I'd be interested to hear more about it.
Okay, I'll take this one. as a nonprofit university press, we are constantly under audit by the U.S. government, whether it's affirmative action or OFCCP. There's lots of folks looking at our metrics for sure. So while I won't discuss our metrics publicly, we do watch them very carefully. The government watches them very carefully, and we are striving to move those metrics north for sure in all of the protected classes completely.
I don't actually know the answer, but I expect it's similar to what Charles said. We work with our HR department at MIT, and they track all of this stuff very carefully and in compliance with existing laws and regulations. So we just do what they tell us in terms.
I think for us, it's just so important. If you're familiar with our list at all, it's an incredibly diverse list. And our authors are like that. And in fact, I remember one day one of our editors saying, we must hire someone in publicity who's a person of color, because it's getting to be too painful for, the publicity department not to be tuned in to that media, to those concerns, those issues, et cetera. And it really has made a difference. So for me, it's really not about numbers. It's about the richness that diversity brings to our staff. And, I'm just thrilled that we've been able to diversify. And my goal is to keep diversifying, just to keep adding more richness to our staff. So.
Thank you so much for everything you guys have been doing and all you reported on. It's really gratifying. My question is actually more for the audience, which is, the three of you are book publishers. Are there any such efforts in the journal sphere that you know of?
I don't know the journal.
Sort of the journal's publishing sphere?
I'm with Elsevier, and we're doing an EDGE certification that is about increasing diversity in the workforce, and it was focused originally on gender, but we've moved it to diversity. It's a global initiative, but it does include the U.S. If there's documentation of that, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Is it on your website? Can we go to your website, Elsevier's website, and find it, or?
Yeah, it could be, but the certification is EDGE, EDGE certification, and it's a global initiative where they come in and rate you about your gender and diversity profile as an employer.
Good to know.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I travel to all types of publishers, so I notice that university presses can be anywhere, of course, but most, in journal publishing at least, most commercial publishers or society publishers tend to be in or near the big cities. So I'm curious, would people from rural communities throughout the country, people from Nebraska, people from Montana, would that diversify your primarily city-based publishers? And if so, are there efforts to go into those communities, into those schools as well?
I'll take that one. So while my role is U.S. talent acquisition, it also includes campus recruiting. So we do speak to campuses around the U.S. Some of our budget constraints means I can't relocate somebody from Nebraska, give them a few dollars to get to New York City or get to North Carolina. But if they are coming this way on their own accord, I certainly do, and we all do, entertain them as well. So we have relationships with them. We post our roles outside of the New York-centric area, the Raleigh-Durham area. So we do have discussions with them, but we just simply can't afford to relocate a lot of young minds across the U.S.
Anything else? No? Great. Well, thank you all so much.
One more.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi, I'm Deborah Cotton from an association publisher, ACM. And I'm wondering if Helen specifically spoke about the culture of white supremacy and how your staff reacted to that, number one. And number two, how you countered, because it seems that there might have been some pushback in terms of maybe reverse discrimination in that sense. So I'd just be interested to know how you address that issue. The other question that I have is, someone mentioned mentoring, and I'd like to know what part that plays in your overall programs.
We're still working on this. We're still working on all aspects of diversity and hiring, recruiting, retaining, and bringing up through the staff, people of color. But at first, it was very difficult, I think, for almost everyone to deal with that term, because it was experienced by a lot of people as pointing a finger and saying, you are a white supremacist. And they think of white supremacist as, KKK. I mean, it's an education piece. It's very much about having them read materials that define white supremacy in a way that they can see it, they can take it in, they can understand. It's not something they created, it's something that they've inherited, but that they need to be very aware of it in order to push against it, to resist and to break it down. And I think once people get to that point, then they're very willing. It's just getting past the defensiveness. No, I'm not a racist. That which everyone wants. I mean, I'm sure it's true to a certain extent that nobody is a racist, at least on my staff consciously, but we're all implicated in this system. And so the education piece there is huge. And we do have a mentorship program, and I think Gita does. So I'll just say briefly, for me, it's also evolving how best to mentor people, how best to make them feel that they're wanted. We did have actually the strongest reaction my staff ever had to anything was to a PW piece that quoted someone, not me, thank goodness, but quoted someone talking about diversity hires. And they were so offended by that, so upset about it, that we had lunch just to talk and process about that article.
Was it about Beacon? I mean, the diversity?
Beacon was mentioned in the article, and I was quoted in the article, but somebody else was quoted talking about making diversity hires. And people didn't want to be the token, the diversity hire. And that is kind of offensive when you think about it. So we had a lunch to talk about it, and it was very, very important, I think, to make people aware that we felt that they represented diverse communities and cultures, and they were enriching our community and our culture and our ability to publish well because of the things they brought into us. As you said, it's not always about, you walk in knowing book publishing. Well, great, we know book publishing. Walk in knowing something else, a Native American culture or an African American culture or a Latina culture. Those are things that we can't train for, that we're looking for people to bring that into us. And once we got people to a place where they understood how important that was to us, then I think they started feeling more comfortable with the idea that we were trying to diversify the staff. But it's still a work in process, and it will be, I think, always. Oh, you have it.
We don't have a formal mentorship program at My Press, but we have a lot of conversations about mentorship. And it's one of those topics that everybody has a different idea about. Some people think you should have a brown bag and talk about mentorship. I think for for me and many of the senior and executive editors that I work with, mentorship is about working side by side and understanding how the work gets done, how the relationships are cultivated, when to say you're sorry, when to take responsibility, how to do those things. And it just comes in the course of working together closely and learning from one another. And it isn't a one-way transmittal of knowledge from a senior person to a junior person. It goes both ways. So that's the vision that we're trying to inculcate at the press.
Can I just make a comment? So at Oxford, we have two programs, actually. We have a peer advisor program for every new hire that we have, and that's a person that you can go to and talk about the culture within the firm. And then after that, we have a mentor-mentee program as well as a reverse mentorship program as well, where a more junior new hire can speak to a very senior person. We don't police it from an HR perspective. We will watch it, but we won't police it. The peer advisory program, we do police quite closely to make sure they're getting good feedback from a new hire perspective for the first 90 days. After that, when they grow into the mentorship program, that sort of is a self-fulfilling prophecy, I hope.
It's more of a comment, it's not a question. I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a topic I think really needed to discuss a long time ago. And for myself, I am from Mexico. I didn't expect to talk about this, but I was actually an illegal alien as a child. And right now, within my family, there is a target on our backs. And there are people that dislike us because of who we are. There's nothing we can do about it. And a conversation like this is so important to us to have allies, so we don't have to keep pounding that door, that we can rely on folks like yourselves that are fighting along with us. And I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Veronica. So I think that, one more.
Hi, I'm Carol Meyer. I just wanted to put in a plug for a new program that SSP is starting, which is called the Peer Networking Groups. We're doing a pilot program. It'll be a group of 5 to 15 people that do something on a particular topic. I happen to have volunteered to facilitate a group on diversity, so if anybody wants to find out more about that, I'll be here.
So is this like an ongoing?
It's a pilot program. We were planning to do peer networks sort of more broadly, anybody who wants to do a topic. It's a way to get to know people better at SSP as it grows. It just happens to be that this is one of the topics that I proposed and that we're going to do. So
good. I also want to mention, I think it was announced at the luncheon that tomorrow SSP is hosting a cross-organizational discussion to talk about diversity and inclusion. So it's a group of organizations, I think AAUP, who else? PSP, there's quite a few that they're going to be meeting to talk about diversity inclusion and what they can do as across organizations in publishing. So I think that's something that hasn't happened before, so I think that's a really good step forward. It's tomorrow.
Right.
I don't know, I don't have any.
I think that there's Alice would know, there's 14 invited delegates, so Jennifer Passanelli and Alice Meadows, and I think Ben, are you all going? Yeah, so as our early career subcommittee who are working on the initiative, but I think right now they're keeping it
a small number. Hopefully they'll expand it a little bit later, I guess. So anyway, thank you. Thank you all.
Very welcome.